Before we start our project on populations, we need to have a basic understanding of some important concepts related to populations. Yesterday we specifically focused on communities, and your community notes have some information about different kinds of community interactions that can take place, from predation to parasitism to commensalism to mutualism. All of those are different ways that different populations of organisms can interact with each other in the natural world. Today we're going to focus on a few more specifics related to populations in an effort to get ready to do some specific research just based on one particular population of organisms. Density is one important measurement that population ecologists will use to get an idea as to what the population looks like. It allows us to see how many individuals are living in a particular amount of area and helps us understand the behaviors of the animals better as well. Density is the number of something per unit area, and in this case we're looking at how many individuals live in a specific space. As population density increases, the likelihood for spreading disease and other types of negative behaviors also tend to increase. In addition to density, scientists also examine the dispersion of a population to understand better how that population interacts with other individuals within its own population. There are three major types of population dispersion, and they're shown here. The first type of dispersion is clumped. Clumped dispersion organisms tend to live in groups, like this school of fish here. Some other examples of clumped dispersion include things like wolves and other pack animals. Some other organisms have a uniform or even dispersion. These birds are equally spaced and showing uniform dispersion. We often see uniform dispersion in situations where organisms are territorial and defend a particular unit of space, and also in areas where, for example, human planting has happened, like in forests that have been planted by us. The final type of dispersion is random. Those organisms that do not live in groups and are not very territorial tend to be random. You might expect to see them sometimes in groups, sometimes solo. It's hard to judge where exactly they'll be dispersed in their location. As we examine populations, one of the ways that we can do that is by looking at survivorship curves. Survivorship curves help us understand the reproductive strategies of a species, as well as just in general how long those individuals live. If we look at this particular table, we can see that the age of the organism is listed, and it's broken down into 5-year categories for this particular type, which is the Belding ground squirrel. There's a tally in the second column of the number of deaths, how many individuals within that population died each of those sets of years. And that allows us to fairly easily find the number of survivors, how many within that cohort are still alive at that particular time. That allows us then to calculate the percent survival rate. As you can see, from 0 to 5 years, only one of the 35 organisms died, leaving 97% of them surviving. But by the 21 to 25 year zone, we had lost 7 of the original organisms, and we're therefore down to an 80% survival rate. By following a cohort or a single group of organisms born in a single year with a table like this, we're able to get a better picture as to what the survivorship of that organism looks like, and that definitely plays a role in the reproductive strategies of the population as a whole. In nature, there are 3 major types of survivorship curves that can be made from those data, and you can see them in the graph on this page. Type 1 survivorship curves show that over the first several years of life, everybody survives, or most of the individuals are able to survive. By the time we get toward the end of the lifespan, we start to see a significant increase in the slope of the line, showing that the percent frequency of death ends up getting higher. Type 1 survivalship has a very low infant mortality, often due to the fact that the parents often take care of their offspring. Humans are a type 1 survivorship curve. Type 2 survivorship curves show organisms that are just as likely to die at any point in their life. Notice the slope of the line doesn't change, so the death rate is staying constant. These organisms often are toward the bottom of the food chain, and they are just as likely to get eaten in their first year as they are in their 5th or 10th or 20th year of life. This survivorship curve is common to many types of birds and reptiles. The final type of survivorship curve very clearly shows that most of the infants actually pass away relatively early. We see a very steep slope in this region of the graph. Before 10% of the total maximum lifespan has been reached. These individuals often are seen in organisms that are going to have lots of babies in hopes that a few of them survive. So insects are one example of a type 3 survivorship curve, as are many plants. Plants make lots of seeds and they spread them, and a few of those seeds will become full-grown plants and make their own offspring, but not necessarily very many of them. By understanding the survivorship curve, we can start to get a better picture of what kinds of reproductive strategies might be used by a particular population of organisms. Those reproductive strategies also play a role in the overall growth of a population, but it's important to note that in real life, growth is not unlimited. There are pressures that prevent some growth over time. There are two different models of population growth. One is exponential and the other is logistic. Exponential growth is what we'd expect to see if there were no limits to population growth. On our graph, we'll have time on the x-axis, and we'll have the number of individuals in the population on the y. Exponential growth occurs when we start with a small population, and that population grows explosively or exponentially over time. Notice that it's the slope of the line continues to increase, showing that the population is increasing more and more rapidly as time goes on. We might start with 2 individuals and then have 4 and 8 and 16 and 32 and 64 and so on and so forth. The truth is that for most populations, however, growth cannot be unlimited because there are limited resources for those organisms to use. So with logistic growth, we take into account a number known as K, or carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is the number of individuals that a particular ecosystem can sustain. And that number cannot be breached because if it is expanded, individuals in that population will die due to limited resources and not enough food, water, or shelter. So in logistic growth, we have a line where K is, or the carrying capacity of that population. And the population will begin growing exponentially, but as it approaches K, it's going to level off and potentially go a little above K, but then drop back down and stay pretty constant around that carrying capacity. If the population goes too high, individuals are going to die because they don't have enough resources. And that finally brings us to taking a closer look at the reproductive strategies of different types of organisms. There are 2 major reproductive strategies, and you can come up with a little bit of the information about them simply by thinking about 2 different groups of animals. We have things like mice and mosquitoes versus elephants and chimpanzees. If you think about what you know about these organisms, you hopefully recognize that elephants have very few babies, chimpanzees have very few babies at a time, they're pregnant for a long time, and they take care of their offspring. On the other hand, things like mosquitoes and mice have lots of babies, and often have very little to no parental care. And those are major considerations when it comes to taking a look at population maintenance and reproductive strategies. Mice and mosquitoes are defined as R strategists. R strategists are rapid reproducers. They show exponential growth, so their population charts are going to increase very rapidly, but that population size is only temporarily large because the environment is unpredictable. These folks are often at the bottom of the food chain and have a high likelihood of being eaten by something else. Because that environment is unpredictable, and they may or may not live very long, these organisms tend to reproduce very early in life and have lots of small, quickly maturing offspring that they don't take care of. If you think about a mosquito, for example, a mosquito lays its eggs and then it goes away and has no parental care at all. And a mouse may provide a little bit of parental care, but not very much. Mostly it's having a bunch of babies to hope that a few of them survive long enough to reproduce. On the other hand, elephants and chimpanzees are K strategists. These types of organisms show slower population growth than do R strategists, and they have a relatively small population size. Now, that's not to say that there aren't a lot of elephants or chimpanzees in the world, or people for that matter, who are also K strategists, but compared to the insects and the mice and the other organisms that are R strategists, the populations are relatively small. These organisms live in a much more stable environment. They aren't necessarily preyed upon by many other organisms, and in some cases they can even control some of their environment as well. They reproduce later in life in their stable environment and have only one or a few slowly maturing offspring that are large and tend to care for them for at least a little while, like mammals providing milk with the mammary gland. Now that you know about populations and some of the characteristics of populations that you're going to be researching, it's time to start looking at what our project is actually going to look like. Your population project has two parts. The first part is the research phase, and that is going to be done independently, but only after deciding what organism you're going to research with your partner. After your population research is completed, as well as your partner's, you're going to work with that person to create a children's book that shows population ecology concepts. We'll work more specifically on the book portion of this project on our block day, either tomorrow or Thursday, but for now we're going to focus in on the research phase. You need to, with your partner before beginning research, choose two organisms that are connected in nature. Those organisms might be connected by mutualism. They might be connected by commensalism, when one organism benefits and the other is not affected, such as clownfish and anemone. Okay, mutualism again is everybody wins. We might have a situation of a predator or prey. And in that case, we have a winner and we have a loser. You might have a situation where you have two different organisms that compete for the same resources. And again, as we discussed today, that is a lose-lose situation. And you might choose to incorporate parasites, parasitism, which is another win-lose situation, although not necessarily losing life like predation, though that can happen in the long run. So you're going to choose two organisms, and you're going to put that on your worksheet. The worksheet is available either in paper copy from the sub or on Schoology under ecology assignments. You can find it there as well. You decide if you want to do that digitally or on paper, and use your iPad or the computers in the room to answer the questions with respect to your particular organism. Remember that if you are doing, for example, a rose and a honeybee, one of your group mates will research the rose, and you may want to pick a specific species of rose in order to be more efficient with population research, and the other will research the honeybee, or another specific kind of bee. The bottom line is that the more specific you are with the organism populations or species that you're looking at, the easier it's going to be to find the information that you need. Good luck, and this research will be turned in by Friday, and you'll be using it to construct your children's book on your block day this week. Have a great day, and we will see you in the next couple of days.